During our playthrough of Red Dead Redemption 2, there are multiple major plot points that drastically change the narration of the story, but have you ever thought about how things would turn out if it went a little differently? Welcome to the video. You're listening to Phil of Philby Gaming, and today I'm going to be theorising some potential possibilities in the game, and what would have been different if particular scenarios didn't occur or were altered in some way. If you enjoy what you see, please hit like as it helps the videos out a lot, and if you guys want to get in touch, you can do so by either using the comment section or finding me over on Instagram at Philby Gaming, which along with all other useful links will be in the video description below. Please be aware that there will be major spoilers ahead for anyone who's yet to complete the game, and with that being said, let's get straight into today's content. What if they didn't raid the Blackwater Ferry? The beginning of the end for the Van der Linde gang no doubt began with the Blackwater Ferry heist. It forced the gang to flee north to the Snowy Mountains and cost the lives of several, including the Calendar Boys and Jenny Kirk. It also put the Pinkerton Detective Agency on their backs. Now bear in mind, Arthur and Hosea already had a promising scam or deal of some sort going on in town, but because the leader, Dutch Van der Linde, decided to listen to Micah Bell instead, the ferry heist was put forward as the gang's main objective. However, the Pinkertons' learnt of the raid is still under speculation, as no one seems to know, or those that do know are keeping tight-lipped about it. I have a theory on this that it could have been Abigail Roberts, who was trying to find an escape from the gang for her son Jack and her partner John Marston, but others have different theories. Now if Dutch had just listened to Hosea Matthews, his longtime partner, instead of newcomer Micah, where could the gang be instead? I'd imagine that they'd still be in Blackwater, laying low as they'd managed for so long, and obviously the deaths of the 3 gang members wouldn't have happened either. The entire gang could have moved south to the New Austin regions, where they were much less likely to be spotted. The whole region is significantly more remote and would draw less attention to the gang, which was exactly what Dutch's plan was all along. What if Arthur had left with Mary? The somewhat rocky relationship between Arthur Morgan and his former lover, Mary Linton, is complicated. They were young sweethearts back in the day. Mary knew what Arthur was and the loyalty he had to the gang, and aided with her father's disapproval of the outlawed lifestyle, she ended things, which all this time later still stung Arthur pretty badly. She made it clear that he wasn't good enough for her. Mary married a gentleman some time later, who unfortunately passed away to pneumonia. Following this, she would seek out Arthur again. At first, he believes that it may be to rekindle their previous romance, but Mary just wants Arthur's help. This is a recurring theme with her, which led many players to dislike the character, as she only seemed to call for Arthur whenever she needed something from him. But what if Arthur had stayed with her all them years back, instead of focusing his time and loyalties to the gang? To be perfectly honest, I'd imagine he'd be much more miserable than he was. Although Arthur cared a lot for both Mary and her younger brother Jamie, the relationship would have been under strain from her father constantly. And look at the fact that Mary only wants to see Arthur when she's in need of him. I think this would have been a very unhappy marriage for Arthur, as he would spend his life feeling like he wasn't living up to either Mary's or her family's standards, and only called upon when she had a need for him. What if they never found each other after Guarma? After the attempted robbery on the Lemoyne National Bank failed miserably and the gang lost a few of their members, such as Hosea Matthews and Lenny Summers, they are forced to flee. A handful of them smuggle themselves aboard a ship as stowaways. After the ship gets caught in a storm and capsizes, the scattered Van der Linde gang find each other on Guarma, an island off the coast of Cuba. After some time, they manage to make it back to their homeland, but for a reason that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, all separate without arranging a meeting point. Now, as the story goes, Arthur travels to the gang's most recent hideout, the abandoned manor of Shady Belle, where he can find a handwritten letter from Sadie Adler confirming their new hideout location. Only minutes after being there, the Pinkerton Detective Agency show up, forcing Arthur to flee. What would have happened if the Pinkertons arrived before Arthur and had found and possibly destroyed the letter from Sadie before Arthur got a chance to read it? He would have had absolutely no idea where to find the rest of the gang, not a clue on even where to begin neither. Luckily for the remaining members, Sadie had took the reins in Dutch's absence, so if none of the others had returned, she would have been the one to lead this group. This would have made the gang much less interested in performing robberies and such, and concentrate more on their family, potentially moving away from a life of crime indefinitely. What if Dutch didn't get involved with the two feuding families? As the player enters Chapter 3 of the game and the gang have set up camp at Clemens Point to the south, Dutch almost instantaneously involves both himself and the gang with the local law in the nearby town of Rhodes, the Grey family. It's not long before Dutch learns that the Greys are in a bitter feud with a neighbouring family, the Braithwaites. Dutch had his gang insert themselves into both families, attempting to play one off against the other, in search of apparent hidden gold stashed someplace. As Arthur and a few others carry out tasks for the two rivals, their identities became known, leading to disastrous consequences for the gang. But what if they'd stayed clear of the whole thing entirely? The gang could have remained in the south, where they were clear of rivaling O'Driscolls, Pinkerton detectives, and Leviticus Cornwall. They weren't recognised in the town of Rhodes, even by the local law, so there was no need to become involved with them whatsoever. Their identity was concealed. Young Sean Maguire would still be alive, Bill Williamson wouldn't have been shot, and the Braithwaites would have no reason to kidnap Jack Marsden too. Jack's kidnapping also led to Angelo Bronte, which then brought the attention of the law of Saint Denis to the gang. The bank job in this city could have gone a lot better too, as the law wouldn't have been aware of the gang's presence in the area and wouldn't have been watching them so closely. What if Hosea was still alive? Hosea Matthews was Dutch's right-hand man. He was very respected in the Van der Lin's gang and often had Dutch's ear. Every time there was a plan that Hosea thought was a bad idea, but Dutch went ahead with it anyway, it always ended badly, such as the Blackwater Ferry heist, the robbery on the Leviticus Cornwall train, or the meet-up with Cornwall Driscoll. Hosea had a knack for sensing danger. During the bank heist in Saint Denis, Hosea is killed by Agent Milton of the Pinkertons, right in front of the gang. But what would the outcome have been if he'd survived the raid? Dutch Van der Lin and Hosea Matthews went way back. They rode together for many years. Hosea was unwell as it was, and was seen several times telling Dutch that he didn't have long left, so his death was expected sooner or later, but to die in such a sudden fashion was a shock to everyone. Most believe that watching his friend die was a turning point for Dutch's mental stability, and after he was gone, Micah saw an opening to be the one in his ear, eventually leading to the downfall of the Van der Lin gang. If Hosea was still alive, he would have guided Dutch in a better direction. Bad decisions Dutch made, such as getting involved in the war between the Native Americans and the United States Army, leaving John Marsden to rot in prison, or killing Leviticus Cornwall, were all part of the downward spiral of the gang. I believe many of these choices would have been avoided entirely, and the gang would have been in a much better position than they were during the later events of the game. What if Arthur never got sick? Early on in the game, as the gang flee the snowy mountains and head to the much warmer Horseshoe Overlook, the bookkeeper / loan shark Leopold Strauss sends Arthur to collect a payment from the struggling farmer Thomas Downs. It's something that Arthur had done many times for the gang before, and thought nothing of it to get physical when collecting. As we all know, this was a tragic mistake by the protagonist as he contracted tuberculosis from the debtor. As time progressed, Arthur began to show symptoms which would increasingly worsen over time, leading to his death in the later stages of the main story of the game. But what if Arthur hadn't visited the Downs family ranch that day? Aside from the obvious that he wouldn't have caught TB, let's take a look at a couple of other situations. If Strauss had sent someone else to Thomas Downs instead of Arthur, that collector may have possibly been in a similar position regarding the disease. But what of the Downs family? They were already heavily in debt, and Thomas was dying as it was, so the life of Edith and her son, for the near future at the very least, would have been somewhat similar. As Arthur reunites with them later in the game, he guides Mrs. Downs into making better decisions for herself and her son, even giving them money to get started on a new life. The Downs family would later become rich after opening up golf courses, but would any of this have happened if Arthur hadn't met Edith once more? Would she still be working the streets? And what about his life in the gang? Dutch's mental decline was triggered after the death of Hosea, so I doubt Arthur's diagnosis would have been a contributing factor to this, but as he entered the later stages of his illness and helped John and his family more, or aided the church in Saint-Denis, would he have acted the same way towards this if he wasn't dying? Bear in mind, Arthur was a hired gun and enforcer for the Van der Linde gang, as well as a debt collector. He would often show no remorse towards people he didn't know, so it's quite possible that he would have continued his ways if he was still fit and healthy. Whatever the potential outcomes could have been, the sad truth is we'll never really know, but it was still fun to make this video. If you guys enjoyed and wish to see more, make sure to hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing too. If the video does well enough, I'll most definitely produce a follow-up to it. Do you have any theories or thoughts on the game? What do you think may have happened if things went a different way? Let us know in the comment section below. Thank you all for watching. You've been listening to Phil or Philby Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.